And welcome to today's Order Paper Urgency Special. We're just waiting for one of our guests to sit there and pop in. I'm just going to be messaging him in ETA. But how's Laura today?
Tired, busy. Tired and busy.
Oh, I can understand that feeling. I had a bit of a nice surprise today. Got a phone call from the generator hire company to say the generator that were originally going to sit there and hire out for Vinegar Hill has crapped itself.
Oh, wonderful.
I know. And the next alternative is they're trying to get their 30 kilowatt to be put onto a trailer, but he said my van would not be able to pull it.
Right.
Did I just roll out of bed? I don't know. My hair is a bit weird. I do need to go to the hairdresser to get it thinned out. I'm probably not going to get a hair appointment for Christmas because Miranda is so popular. Who knows? So, yes, it's going to be a bit of a bumper day today. So in today's show, we'll be covering the Residency Tenancy Amendment Bill, which is the reintroduction of no-clause evictions, which we'll cover in both committee of the House, where we'll get to have my favourite MP that I absolutely can't stand the guts off Tampa ask the Minister questions, considering we here at Instant Ballot also believe showcasing the people we don't like as well as those that don't, especially when they ask very, very good questions. And after that, we'll get the Crime Legislation Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill first reading. So, yeah, we are definitely going to have a bumper show, and hopefully Gabriel will sit down there and peer in there, raring to go. So let's kick off with, get up to here. It's a bit of a, we'll kick off with Lawrence Zunan on the first speech and basically hear the round of the questions. And as you know, we'll go back to 1.5 speed so we can cover more content in such a narrow space of time. For our one viewer. Oh, suddenly we got 4.
Is meant to cover the damage. So it's sort of, I'm not sure, or maybe I've misunderstood.
Lawrence Yunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good to see the Minister back on a different committee stage, Bill. Welcome back. My first question is on the definition in Clause 4, Subclause 1. Now, within this, I understand that there's been a new insertion of the definition of what keeps a pet means, and we can discuss that a little bit later. But my first question is, what is defined as pet? Because what I'm seeing here immediately is that pet does not include a disability assistant dog, which has given a specific definition within an act, but it doesn't actually define pet more broadly. And I do apologize, I haven't had the time to check the principal legislation to see if the Residential Tenancies Act 1986 already contains a definition of pet. But I guess with this, the bigger question is, people keep different forms of pet. Is there a scope or some sort of boundary around what that could look like? Whether anything can be considered a pet in this regard, as long as the owner themselves declares that that is a pet. So that would be my first question. I'm sure other people will have many other questions on this particular section.
Honourable Karen McEnroe.
Looks like the Minister's not answered the question, so let's head to Karen from the Waitangi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thought I would start by touching on the broader themes around the pet bonds and then ask specific questions about an amendment that I've put in. I'm keen to understand from the Minister's perspective what alternatives were explored here. And by way of reassurance, I'll get out from the get-go that we support this part, at least. In general, we don't support the bill as it currently stands, but there are some things in this bill that we are supportive of, and we'll make that clear throughout. Pet bonds are one of those. We take the view that we support measures that will look to make it easier for tenants to have pets. That makes sense for us. We know that it's an issue and that it has been a long-standing one. The question is pet bonds the best way to go about it. We don't know the answer to that, and I don't think that the government does because it hasn't been tried before, but in general we support it because it's worth a go. But I am keen to understand what other mechanisms were considered and what advice or examples overseas did the Minister look at to get a gauge as to how effective a pet bond might be in allowing tenants to have pets. I get the rationale that in having a bond, landlords may be more willing to allow tenants to have pets because if there is any issues that arise from that they have a bond there that they can extract from to cover damage, etc. But I think it's important that we understand the broader work that was done to land on pet bonds and the alternatives that were considered. So speaking on that, Madam Chair, I want to speak to an amendment that I have tabled to insert a new subsection. This is to Section 8, and it essentially proposes an exemption for greyhounds. So we are in a situation where this week the House has unanimously supported a bill through the House that would look to protect greyhounds as the first step towards banning greyhound racing. And what we do know from that is that there's roughly 2,900 greyhounds that will need to be rehomed. And on the whole, there has been a broad level of support for this, but then that support inevitably leads to how we're going to find a home for these dogs. And it's a question that the government is going to have to grapple with, and it's one that the Labor Party are more than willing to work with them to try and find a solution to that. And it's in that vein that I asked the Minister to consider this amendment, because it is made in good faith, and it is a genuine attempt to try and address that issue. And it seems to me that this is an appropriate way in which to look to solve that. So at the moment, Madam Chair, we have a situation where the bill proposes that outside of assistance dogs, that a bond can be placed by a landlord for any tenant that wants to have a pet. But when we've got a large number of greyhounds about to be seeking a home, we need to also look at ways in which to assist that. And so what this amendment proposes is by inserting a new subsection that a landlord may not require payment of a pet bond for a maximum of one greyhound which was previously engaged in greyhound racing or bred for greyhound racing for a period of 4 calendar years following the assent of the bill. And I'll just walk through the rationale here and the thinking. So we don't want it to be all greyhounds because we want it to be reasonable and try and find a pragmatic way forward. We were concerned that if we just said greyhounds, that would include whippets and Italian greyhounds as well. Now they are quite, what's the difference is a very good question. And look, I'm no expert, but they're not greyhounds. They are,
Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you very much. They are kind of like exclusive breeds, they're fashionable dogs. Italian greyhounds are very, very small. Whippets are in between an Italian greyhound and a greyhound. But the point is, Madam Chair, they're not used for racing. And there's no surplus. They are bred commercially and people have them in that, and that's all good. The point here is to try and limit the scope of this to greyhounds that had been engaged in racing or bred for racing. So any greyhound that was purchased through a commercial breeder wouldn't count. The reason we suggested a period of 4 calendar years is because once the legislation passes, it looks like that greyhound racing will wind down by 2026. Now, I know with conversations with the likes of SPCA and SAFE and other stakeholders that have been engaged in the debate about this issue, they've indicated that it could take up to 18 months, 2 years to make sure that every greyhound gets a home. And so I thought it would be pragmatic to have a window of 4 years to account for the period from now leading up to when the ban on greyhound racing comes in, and then an up to 2 year period after that to help find a home for greyhounds.
You mixed up your speech notes.
No? I mean, this is typical of this government, isn't it? We come with a genuine proposal to try and help the government find a solution to an issue, and Penny Simmons has a go. The thing is, Madam Chair, after those 4 years, pet bonds can come in. So we're not saying it's a ban for the rest of the time, and we're not suggesting that a landlord that allows a greyhound in can't then bring in or request a pet bond after that period. It's just a pragmatic way to try and help home greyhounds. It is proposed in goodwill. We are happy and flexible to work with the Minister. I'm quite happy to have a back and forth throughout this to try and get the details right. We might want to work on the definition. We might want to work on the window, how long that is, whatever they're comfortable with. But the guts of this is that we have an opportunity through this bill and through this clause to assist the government in finding homes for those greyhounds that will no longer be in the racing industry.
Dr Lawrence Yunnan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I am also waiting for the Minister to respond to my earlier question on the definition of a pet, and I want to speak more in depth to that question, but I think first of all, we also would like to support the Honourable Kieran McAnulty's proposal around rehoming of greyhound in light of the bill that...
Let me deal with them. In terms of first contribution from Lawrence Yunnan, in terms of the definition of pet, I'm advised that no country when it comes to tenancy law defines pet, basically. It's deliberately left as open as possible because people's definition of pets, I mean, members can think through the logistical challenges with that. However, the bill makes it clear that disability support dogs are exempt from the pet bond. So to answer, I think, address those concerns, if you are disabled and have a support dog, the landlord cannot charge a bond for that, and the bill makes that clear. So I think most people would agree that that is the right thing to do, and so that the definition of pet explicitly excludes a support dog, but the whole point of that is to make sure that a bond can't be charged for it. In terms of the definition of pet, we've deliberately left that open. In terms of his other point around possible discrimination against people on the grounds of what particular pet they have or suitability, I think the key point here for him and everyone to bear in mind is quite a significant change to the law, which is at 42E, particularly 4. So what we're doing is reversing what we have at the moment. So the landlord, if the bill passes, the landlord will not be able to refuse consent to have a pet without reasonable grounds or attach an unreasonable condition to the consent. That is sort of buried in the scheme of the legislation, but that is the kind of core operative thing, is that landlord can't now refuse consent without reasonable grounds for tenants who wish to have pets. It's essentially a reversion of the status quo, and so it reverses the presumption. So you're allowed a pet, and you can have a pet as a tenant, and thousands of New Zealanders are tenants, and thousands of them either have pets or want to have pets. And I think members broadly agree with the proposition that we want to make it easier for tenants to have pets, and so we are taking quite a significant step in saying that that's fine. Landlords can only refuse consent with reasonable grounds. In terms of what that means, there will be guidance published by the bureaucracy, officialdom, about some suggested definitions about what reasonable means. But ultimately, this will be worked through the tribunal, and there will be cases in which landlords refuse consent and tenants challenge that through the tribunal, and that's appropriate because ultimately they are the arbiter of tenancy law. That's the appropriate appeal authority, so to speak, when it comes to tenancy law. So, and that's completely right and proper. And in fact, the bill makes some other, in other parts, makes some changes to the operation of the tribunal, which is a good thing. So we're comfortable with how it's drafted at the moment. I think we've got the balance right in it. I think it will provide a lot of benefits for tenants who want to rent, but also want to have a pet. And we know that hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders have pets, and they're a very important part of stability and social life for many people, friendship, fellowship, mental health, very, very important. That's why we're doing this. And to recognise that pets can cause damage, and to try and incentivise landlords to be encouraging of tenants to have pets, we have put in place that pet bond provision. Now, Honourable Kerry McAnulty asks about what other countries do. The truth is there's a variety of different approaches, broadly in line with what the government's proposing around withholding of not unreasonable withholding of consent. Some countries give nearly an absolute right to have a pet. Other countries have a slightly softer approach. It varies depending on the law and the jurisdiction. Western Australia, I'm advised, has pet bonds. So we think this is a good step forward. In terms of the Honourable Kerry McAnulty's amendment around greyhounds, we had a good look at it, and I've had a conversation with Mr Abel, who has a similar proposal as well. We've had a good look at it. I can advise that the government will not be supporting it, and I do want to explain why. And it goes back to the point I made before around the incentive to take a tenant who wants to have a pet. That the quid pro quo of allowing pets, or making it easier to have pets, the quid pro quo is the bond for the potential damage, the extra 2-week bond that can be charged. Madam Chair,
Honourable Chris Bishop.
Just finish this point briefly. The quid pro quo is the extra 2 weeks that can be charged. If you exempt the ability to charge the bond, it may actually be counterproductive and have a sort of perverse effect of incentivising landlords to encourage tenants to have pets that are not greyhounds. Because if you exempt greyhounds out of the pet bond provision and say you can't charge a bond for a greyhound, and look, I know I love greyhounds as much as the member who suggested the amendment does. That's possibly true. I don't have one, so that's a good point. But we thought about it. But I love greyhounds. But you can get one now. Well, indeed, and there's quite a few to get. There's a bit going on at our house at the moment, so we might just wait. I'm not sure my family would be too keen on me committing to that on the floor of Parliament. We'll see. So yeah, it may actually be it may be perhaps have a perverse outcome. So we think the better approach is allow landlords to charge pet bonds, and I'm fully on board with his desire and drive to make sure that we rehome those roughly 3,000 greyhounds that will need a home in the next 20 months or so as the industry closes down. So yeah, appreciate the drive. We had a good look at it because it kicked it around a bit, but we won't be supporting his amendment.
Okay, so let's get down to commentary sort of part. We do have our resident Latino based in Penny Simmons' constituent has joined us on the show. Finally, you've managed to make it. You've managed to make sure that the kids aren't going to somehow accidentally end up on camera. And now we can't actually hear you. Gee, this is what happens when you turn up late. You don't get the pre-show checks.
Alright.
It's quite funny.
So I'll jump on in with my commentary then. Okay, so pet bonds, don't have a problem with them. What I have a problem with is the fact that they've been lumped in with 90-day no-cause evictions. So basically a landlord can give consent, so it's like, yeah, sure, you can move on in with a pet, and then, they can revoke consent without providing any reason. So, yeah, that's nice. Wonderful.
Well, that is completely true. And there are some landlords who that's the standard way they function.
Yep. So, yeah, sure, you can have a cat. Oh, wait, I don't like that particular breed of cat. You're out. I don't know. They can come up with any stupid reason now to evict someone.
Oh,
That's pretty bad. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you perfectly fine.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Sorry I was late.
Well,
my pre-show checks. But yeah, look, I completely agree with Laura. Like, I think the reasoning here is categorically cooked. I mean, like, I have some appreciation. I definitely don't agree with the bill as a whole. Obviously, the pet thing is fairly uncontroversial, right? That's kind of like a chaser for a very nasty, bitter shot, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I hardly think that needs any airtime. Like, I think that it's purely just lip service to try and do something that should be categorically, wildly, politically unpopular, but because of the fundamentally broken way that New Zealand views housing, unfortunately, a move as genuinely insane as this isn't. Now, where I have some level of sympathy, right, is that, one could make the argument that the threshold required to establish an eviction previously was perhaps on some level perhaps like more unfeasible than it probably should be, right? So I think that the previous standard was you had to have I think 3 separate instances, 3 separate forms of evidence, and then all of those had to pass I think a fairly high bar at tribunal, right? So I think I can understand why there could be some situations throughout the country where that might lead to a tenancy continuing that shouldn't. Now, personally, I'm of the opinion that private tenancies shouldn't be a thing, right? In terms of where are antisocial people housed, because I mean, let's face it, there is a reality, right, in which there are folks who even if they're in a social housing type enterprise, are still failing to respect the society and the place that they're in. The Netherlands has, I think quite a good policy around this, where there is actually housing specifically built for those people. There's like higher wraparound social services, higher security as well to keep everybody safe, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't have private tenancies, period. I think landlording is a dirty business that is not a legitimate economic activity. I am wholeheartedly in agreement with Adam Smith in terms of what he had to say about landlords and the practice of rent seeking. It is a net economic loss. It shouldn't exist. A free market is a market that is free from landlords, right? Chapter 11, The Wealth of Nations, by the way, if you guys are interested in what Adam Smith actually had to say about landlords. So anyway, back to the actual bill in question, though. It's nuts. Like, if they want to keep private landlordism, which we shouldn't, but if you want to do that, and you want to create a situation where there's less tenancies carrying on that probably shouldn't be in the way that they are, then maybe consider reviewing or revising or lowering some of those thresholds. But giving people no protections and instating a total regime of no cause evictions at any point for any reason is totally insane. And the reality is, why they're actually doing this, right? Because fundamentally what it does is it undermines the healthy home standard. Right. Yeah. So what Chris Bishop has said previously is that, retaliatory evictions are still legal. But you can evict anybody for any reason, and that is still legal. So, like, it creates a legal fiction, a legal absurdity within that. And I mean, look, that's a pressure that my wife and I are feeling right now. Like, we've had a number of quite unpleasant, negative interactions with the property manager in the past. We're hoping that relationship is now better. But the reason we've even had those problems in the first place was because we had to contact tenancy services over a repair that wasn't being done. This did not gel with the property manager's ego. And I just think it's ridiculous, this notion that the way that Chris Bishop has tried to defend this bill is he's continuously tried to say, well, no good landlord's ever going to kick out a good tenant for no bloody good reason, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but the reality of the situation, yeah, exactly. They do all the time. Like genuinely.
It's like, put it this way. If there was a mechanic who sat down there and was like not doing the repairs on the car for a warrant of fitness, it won't get a sticker for a warrant of fitness, which means it wouldn't be able to sit there and be driven on the road. If that was a real estate agent doing that to a house, there's a form of accountability. But you are right, there are some property managers out there who have egos that are probably need to be tamed down, and no-cause evictions effectively empowers that bad ego that no other industry would sit there and do. Like, imagine if you sat down there and, had that same sort of ego at, what's it called? A supermarket.
Or literally any other context. Like, it's the I'm trying to think how to explain it. Like, the realities of interactions that come about in the, I don't even want to call it a business, but like within rent seeking, right, within that whole domain, that sphere, and everything that it entails, would be categorically unacceptable in any other context. But again, we kind of turn this bizarre blind eye to it in New Zealand, because so long as there's still more people in the country that are on the take that are not on the take, there remains this unwillingness to change the situation. And a big part of it has to do with, not only is it nice and convenient to turn a blind eye when you're benefiting from this absurd system in one way or another, but also because, people aren't interested in these stories. They have too much nuance. It causes, people have to then stop and think about the fact that actually economics don't exist in a vacuum to power and politics, and it can just be overwhelming for people, and they would just rather get their paychecks and not worry about it. Yeah.
Okay, let's get let's see what Timothy Paul has question-wise.
Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your answers. Great to be here. Really keen to have a good, robust discussion with you about this bill. So, because I missed the first part, I'm going to start, but just cut me off if this is already being covered, because thankfully there's lots of areas that we can go into. So, I want to ask a question about the evidential basis behind this bill, because from following this bill through the select committee process, it became apparent to me that it seems like there was a decision that you arrived at, Minister, that you decided no cause evictions coming back to New Zealand. As you do, as you're the Minister.
Just point out as part 2, if we can keep to part 1.
Yeah, I guess the evidence that I'm talking about underpins every part of this bill, so that's...
Okay, well, it's fair to ask about evidence, but if you're referencing things, make sure you're in part 1.
Yeah, okay. So, I guess focusing on the evidence behind part 2, this part in the bill.
Part 1.
I want to understand how you arrived at this bill and what evidence underpins these particular parts that we are discussing currently. Because to me, it seemed like you had an objective that you wanted to achieve, but then it seems that we've worked backwards to find the evidence to create the basis for the bill. And so what I want to understand is, what is the evidence? Because in my view, the regulatory impact statement that underpins this bill and these parts was like uncharacteristically not as detailed as other RISs that there have been prepared by the officials, and I felt the evidential case wasn't particularly strong, which is unlike that particular ministry. And so, I would love for you to stand up and tell us what the evidence is behind it, particularly given that there isn't a lot of support for this bill, with 97% of submissions being opposed, and then is it 53% of property managers and landlords being opposed to this bill as well. So if there's not the support there, not this kind of overwhelming call from landlords and property managers for this, then why was this pursued as a political objective if that evidence is not there? So I think you get what I'm getting at, so I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, Mr. Chair, the members talking about stuff in part 2 were actually on part 1, but I'm happy to address the point. If we want to do it as all parts as one. No? Okay, well, okay, well, I'm going to be, well, not really, because you're basically talking about, okay, the evidence for pet bonds, which is part 1, the evidence is really clear, and I think the member would probably agree with me, that there are a lot of tenants who wish to have a pet who can't have a pet. I think most reasonable people realise that's been a bit of a gap in the law. The law's been unclear. Probably most people would agree it's been too hard to have a pet, so the evidence underlying it is that we want to make it easier, and I think most people broadly accept that, and the member wasn't here, but we've traversed the provisions around not being able to unreasonably withhold consent, and the quid pro quo of that being that you've the ability to charge up to 2 weeks for a pet bond. Timothy Paul.
Isn't it? Aren't you not supposed to mention when a member is and isn't in the House?
Oh, don't worry about that one. That's just waffle. Interesting point from Timothy Paul. I mean, you don't want to have, say, Chris Bishop and Wainui Amata kindly asking a constituent while door knocking, can I please use your toilet, and have your anti-national landlord sit there and boot their tenant with a no-cause eviction because Chris Bishop used the toilet?
I don't know. That's kind of funny, but I don't think a landlord's going to be booting you because you invited a Tory into your house. Like, if we're going to be frank, right? Like...
Well, you never know. I do know one particular flat that my friend Tony lived in. They got kicked out because they were gay. Because the landlord was a homophobe.
True, that's back on the table now.
And that, you know, it got away with it because of 90-day no-clause evictions back in 2016.
Yeah, right. No, it's pretty.
Yeah,
No cause
you
of
know,
actions in
so, I
general.
mean, you know, if you can be kicked out for being gay, you can be kicked out for letting Chris Bishop to use your toilet. It's
could be
very
kicked out for being
plausible.
brown. Kicked out for any reason these days.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, mention that if that was like, you know, having an anti-national landlord kicking out the tenant because like
Yeah. Just quickly too, like something interesting that Kiwi said there in the chat. So what the law was, or it has been and still is, and is going to be added to, is that you could collect a bond for a pet. However, it was that your total bond could not exceed 4 weeks. So I remember when I first entered the rental market, the usual standard was to get around like 2 weeks, so like the first week of rent and the last week of rent. And then once the amount was raised so that you can collect up to 4 weeks of rent, part of the reasoning behind this was so that you could allow like things like extra bond for a pet. The way that the rent-seeking establishment took this is, oh, we'll just ask for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Because why not? And so having a part of the bond specifically dedicated for pets, like, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, in the sense that what probably should have happened is when this practice changed from 2 weeks to 4, it should have remained as the first and the last week of rent being the bond. And then you could do another 2 weeks on top of that, specifically reserved for pets. But because that was not done, you now have these situations where people are, if you want to have a pet, you're going to have to pay 4 weeks of rent plus another 2 weeks of rent on top. Like, I mean, it's kind of absurd. But what are you going to do about it? The other thing too that's really troubling about this, right, is like, yeah, no worries, Kiwi, is like, if you have a tenancy currently, right, and your landlord really doesn't want to give you a pet, right, or, you know, allow you to have a pet, but like technically the way the law is written, they shouldn't have reasonable grounds to refuse. But if they really don't want you to have a pet, they could just so happen to evict you without cause, without notice anyway. So like even this idea of like, well, landlords aren't allowed to refuse a so-called reasonable request is still in and of itself absurd. Like just the number of absurdities that swinging the pendulum this far in this particular direction creates is just totally out of whack. Like, again, I could have some sympathy for some argument that perhaps things were a little bit too much one way before, but the answer to then take this nuclear option, like, I don't know, I'm profoundly disappointed, but unfortunately not surprised.
No cause evictions are used as a thing of, I can't be bothered keeping paperwork, but I want to be able to sit down there and kick people out when they do something wrong without actually following due process.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the thing that comes in there. Like, you know, like, put it this way, you can't sack an employee for a no-clause employment termination. It's not...
unless they earn over $180,000, which is the Brooke Van Belden thing that...
yes, that's very new. But, yeah, you know, pretty much basically, like, you can't be sacked someone in that. Like, if you have a contract with, say, you've got a 9-year P-time contract for bus... for running buses. In the case of Wellington, Transurban, what's the current name of Kinetic? If it's Kinetic, which owns NZ Bus. You've got Newlands Bus Service, which is owned by Transdev. You've got User Bus. They've got 9-year contracts. They can't just be told, oh, you got 90 days and we're going to cut your contract. You know, you can't do that. You know, it's basically, you know, it's like, it's the only industry where it's like, you can be sloppy and get away with it.
The worst part too, right, is like, look, it's not that difficult to find another job, but like getting kicked out of your home is honestly a lot more disruptive.
Oh, especially when you've got to sit there and try to manage rental viewings around your job.
100%.
You know, yeah, and like, here's something worth noting: the limit on how much to get a bond from Wins without manager's approval is $600. That was the limit in the 80s. Before we were all born.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
You know, which just says a hell of a lot about it. Okay, let's see what Kira McAnulty has more questions. I'm just going randomly through this list here of stuff because, you know, all sorts could be on the cards.
So, Minister, I've amended my amendment. to try and address your responses. And to be honest, this is exactly how committee station works. So it's really good to see that you are, as you said, at least willing to consider it. So in responding to your concerns that the original proposal might have a perverse outcome, primarily focused on the disincentive that this may prove with landlords who would be less inclined to take on a pet if the bond wasn't there. I get that, there's some logic there. So what I'm proposing is to add wording to the amendment, a new, but 1B, so during this period, the 4-year proposal, after which obviously a pet bond can be issued. So during this period, tenant liability for pet damage caused by a greyhound, as defined above, so those that have participated in racing or been bred for racing, could be extended by up to 2 weeks' rent to account for the lack of a pet bond. So from the landlord's perspective, if they allow a greyhound, or a tenant with a greyhound, they actually, if there's damage caused, are able to claim more than they would otherwise to account for the fact that there was no bond. So in essence, if there's damage caused, the landlord has the ability to claim that. But the exemption of the pet bond allows more people to take on a greyhound without having to stump up with 2 weeks' rent. So you incentivise people to take on a former racing greyhound, and you incentivise landlords to take on those people, allow those people to take on a greyhound, knowing that if there is damage caused, they can claim up to what they would have been able to do if there was a pet bond. And I'm hoping that the Minister will see that this addresses his concerns. It's consistent with the intent of the pet bond. It will assist the government in the challenge that it now has in terms of finding residences for former racing greyhounds. I hope it's seen as a bit of a win-win. Like I say, I genuinely approaching this with goodwill, trying to be pragmatic, happy to work on specific detail. I'm not going to die in a ditch on wording or whatever. I'm just trying to find a way to make this work.
Mr. Chair.
Honourable Minister.
Well, I haven't seen the revised amendment, so happy to have a look at that, see it in its full context. I suppose my point would be, if you exempt former greyhounds from the pet bond rules, so that you don't have to, you're not allowed to charge an upfront bond, so that tenants don't have to pay an upfront bond, so that it's more likely a landlord will take on a tenant with a greyhound, or that it was more likely that tenants will go and get greyhounds because they're more likely to be able to have a pet, have a home with a pet in them. But then you say at the back end of it, you can charge up to 2 weeks for damage. Why don't you just have a 2-week bond? Because that 2-week bond is meant to cover the damage. So it's sort of, I'm not sure, or maybe I've misunderstood the member's point, but I don't. Why don't you just charge a pet bond?
Mr. Chair. Thank you. So the reality is there's going to be a hell of a lot of greyhounds that need a home. There's going to be people that want to take on a greyhound but can't front up with 2 weeks' rent to issue a bond immediately. I know that for a fact because I've had people contact me saying, this is great, I want to take a greyhound, but my landlord won't let me. That's not uncommon, right? That's the whole point of a pet bond. If the rationale is true that if we allow landlords to issue a pet bond, then they will be more forthcoming to the idea of a pet, it actually doesn't address the instance that for some people they won't be able to front up with 2 weeks' rent. Now, I actually agree with your argument that in general, if this was a proposal across the board, it's counterproductive and sort of misses the point, I get it. But this is specific for former racing greyhounds and greyhounds bred for racing. We know there are people that would take them but can't afford the bond. We know that there are landlords that would allow them if the tenant pays a bond. Exempting tenants from the bond if they adopt a former racing greyhound deals with that issue. Extending the potential liability if that greyhound causes the damage addresses the potential barrier to a landlord taking it on without a pet bond. I think it's a pragmatic response to both realities. If tenants wouldn't have an issue fronting up with a bond, I don't think there'd be a need for this, but we know that there are people that will. It's in the regulatory impact statement. There'll be some people that simply cannot afford the bond. And so it's logical that if that is a fact, that there will be people that would love to take on a greyhound but can't afford the bond. Look, we're not talking about thousands of people here. It might only be a couple of hundred. But when we're trying to find homes for 2,900 greyhounds, this is a practical way to help to get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I get what he's saying. One practical problem is that the pet bond system won't be operational until late next year anyway. There's a bunch of back-end stuff that MB's in the middle of quite a large upgrade to the tenancy system. It's pretty antiquated, to be honest. As I understand it, the bond system's called Bond 2000, which gives you a sense about when it was built. So it's 24 years old. So, credit to the last government, kicked off a process of upgrading. It's probably overdue. Actually, the first stage of it went live a couple of weeks ago, and there's other stuff happening. So the pet bond system won't be operational until probably late 25, early 26. That's okay, but we do have an issue in the next year or so around these greyhounds. So I think we're unlikely to support the amendment. I understand what he's trying to do. What I will do, give him a commitment on, is that there is going to be further legislation around greyhounds, which has been signalled by the DPM next year. So I'm not the responsible minister, but I'm happy to try and facilitate some constructive conversations around how we might look at this issue of rehoming in the context of tenancy law, in the context of that legislation. It may be that I'm just reluctant to commit to something here on the floor of the House that we just haven't thought through. It's not a great way to make law. So happy to go away and consider it properly. And if it may be is when we legislate in the new year around greyhound racing generally, which I hope the opposition will support as well. It may be that we can do some, and it may be other wider changes around tenancies in relation to greyhounds, or I'm getting a little bit ahead of the government and the cabinet here, but it's pretty clear we've got 3,000 dogs to rehome as the member knows, and we want to make sure we do right by those dogs. So happy to look at it in that context, but I think I'll keep looking at it, thinking about it. But I think we're unlikely to support this amendment, but I acknowledge the issue.
Okay, so to get to some commentary. Greyhounds.
Yeah, I'm going to be blunt. I think it's astounding how much airtime that issue has taken up in Parliament. It just seems like such a minutia. I also think I have a real discomfort with the discussion because, like, on one hand, there's a part of me that thinks, wow, isn't it lovely that, like New Zealand is the kind of society where even something to this level of detail is being considered and talked about in the House. Like, that's great. That side of it is good. The part of it that is genuinely horrific and just makes me feel profoundly uncomfortable is, like, how on earth are we giving this particular part of a very, in the grand scheme of things, small issue, this much airtime, and not talking about, like, the genuine, like, violence that comes part and parcel with the reality of no cause evictions. Like, I can't.
I think
it just seems nuts, right? Like, look, great compassionate angle. I agree with what Kieran is saying, but I just I can't reconcile the fact that, like, this is being talked about to this level of detail when we're genuinely, seriously, on the precipice of not have passed the law. Has it come into force yet, Sam?
It has passed third reading, which we'll cover a little bit later in the show, the third reading features. We're just at the committee of the House where they basically ask a bunch of questions. So, and I mean, the next one I've got there is Arena Williams and Tamafa Paul is lined up, so we'll jump a fair bit down. So we get out of Kieran's greyhound commentary and hopefully to some real questions, because I know Tamafa will actually bring up the sorts of things about no cause evictions as being the standard operation of the practice, because that's what she's been championing about. She was doing that from the days of when she first ran for the council, when she was the student union president for Victoria University. That's something in there, and this is something that Tamafa would actually do advocate very well. Even when I think she's a nasty person who is a bit hypocritical, she at least knows how to make herself look like she's on the right side of history.
I mean, I don't have a greyhound, but I got a grey cat.
That's funny. The other thing too, like, if they want a solution to this that's fairly clean, like, you can get something like the lotteries fund, one of the many gambling funds, which shouldn't be a thing. The funds themselves are like a bit of sweet to make the nasty go down better, right? But you can use that to put up the bonds for people, like, period. Like, hey, if you're renting, you're eligible to have these, one of these awful schemes is going to put a bit of money towards rehoming the hounds from the industry that should have never existed in the first place. Easy.
Okay, let's kick off with Arena Williams on her question, because I think this will be part 2 of the bill, the next stage.
Where their rights are being stripped away by a government that does not care, that it is weakening their position, where it is making landlords empowered to not only kick their landlords out with 90 days for no reason, but also to weaken their rights in other ways. And we've spent a whole part discussing how the government is being so kind with its approach to pet bonds without any sort of analysis about how the market will be affected. Not only will rents continue to rise under this approach, as the Treasury predicted at its budget predictions, but also people will be affected here. There is no intention, as the government minister and the chair previously said, for MSD clients and those receiving a benefit to be able to use the benefits to increase their availability of pet bonds. There's no intention here for further work to be done on that. So my question to the minister is, if we're weakening the rights of tenants here by increasing the incentives for investors to buy up more of the existing stock of properties, that's the effect, and at the same time we're making insecure tenants feel like even more desperate that they need to get into a house of their own, both of those factors will push rents up and up. And so, is it his position that Clause 22, which reintroduces 90-day no-clause evictions, will drive up rents? And does he agree with Treasury's predictions of the last budget that rents will continue to rise under his watch?
Tamafa Paul.
And kia ora, Minister Pōtaka, nice to have you here, and hope that you'll be able to respond to some of my concerns that I'm about to bring up. So, I believe this is the appropriate part to bring up what I was trying to get at previously, but I want to dig into the evidential basis behind no-cause evictions because, Minister, you're making a really big call in bringing these back, given that this is going to impact more than 1 million renters in our country and make them vulnerable to being evicted and kicked out of their home for no good reason. And so I want to understand where's the evidence, because we were told throughout the Select Committee that the rationale behind this bill was that it would allow landlords and property managers to take a chance on risky tenants by bringing them in and being able to kick them out if they don't like their behaviour. But where's the evidence for that? I mean, that didn't come up at all throughout the Select Committee process in my recollection of it. So I'm just trying to understand where the facts are to back that up, because I don't think they exist. And I believe that the reason that these no-cause evictions were brought back was because it's politically popular to do so, despite the fact that in the submissions on the bill around no-cause evictions, again, 97% of submitters were opposed to no-cause evictions being brought back, and 53% of property managers and landlords were also opposed to no-cause evictions being brought back. So where's the facts to back up bringing them back, given there is such huge risk to the 1 million plus New Zealanders who are now vulnerable to being kicked out for no good reason at all?
Honourable Carmel Cipollone.
Mr Chair, I sat through the submissions and this was the most contested part of the bill. So many issues were raised with the additional vulnerability that will be put on tenants as a result of reinstating the no-cause termination for tenants, Mr Chair. And we were all concerned sitting in that Select Committee. I'm concerned that we're going to see more transient families, concerned that we are going to see families discriminated against, and they will not take up their right to that retaliation clause that's in here, because that is incredibly complex. And as we know, many of these vulnerable families are not likely to go to the Tenancy Tribunal to complain about their landlord. Mr Chair, there are a number of things that I'm concerned about when I look at even the disclosure statement for the bill and also the regulatory impact statement. I want to know from the Minister why he has decided to ignore the advice in the regulatory impact statement where it states landlord's ability to terminate a periodic tenancy in any other case, a no-cause termination, was considered to negatively impact tenant well-being and disincentivise them from exercising rights and raising concerns. That's what I was just speaking to, and it's actually in the advice that accompanies the bill. The statement also noted that although the RTA enables tenants to challenge terminations they suspect have been issued in response to them exercising their rights, tenants may not feel empowered to do so, as it may be difficult to prove this if no reason is provided. Mr Speaker, I need to question the Minister on how he would allow this to go through, why he will not consider any changes, given the fact that the submissions were overwhelmingly opposed to this, and even the officials' advice state or reiterate the same concerns that were raised by, I do believe, as Timothy said, 97% of submitters, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, during the Select Committee process, Mr Chair, I raised a question that was unable to be answered by the officials. However, I wanted them to go away and see if they could find the answer, and I'll put that question now to the Minister. And that question is in relation to how long it actually takes an individual or a family to find and secure another rental property once they leave, have their tenancy terminated, the property that they are residing in. Because I'm concerned, Mr Chair, that we were never presented with any evidence to show that in cities, in areas where there are housing shortages, places like, I can say, West Auckland, where it's quite often difficult to secure a rental, that 90 days may not even be sufficient for that family or individual to be able to secure their next rental property. Mr Chair, as an electorate MP, we have seen this over the years, particularly, I have to say, between 2008 and 2017, where we had a number of constituents who would come through our office very clearly stating that they were not able to get into another rental property, and so therefore we're in a position where they were seeking out emergency accommodation because of the fact that rental properties were not widely available or easy for them to access. I want to know from the Minister whether or not he received any advice on the risk of those who have their tenancies being terminated and not able to find their next rental property, having to seek out support from MSD for emergency accommodation, and what that might mean for the Minister's own target of reducing emergency housing in this country.
Honourable Kerry McAnulty.
Very much, Mr Chair. It's pretty disappointing, to say the least, that the Minister hasn't taken the opportunity to stand up and respond to what are genuine and frankly straightforward questions. Because if we are actually to be able to dive into this part, the substance of the bill essentially, we need to understand the government's rationale, we need to understand what they have based that on, before we can actually look in great detail about why they've landed, where they've landed, the number of days, etc. Because we know that when this bill was announced, and as it has progressed through the parliamentary system, the government have claimed that this bill will help address the housing crisis. Now, up in the first part, we have discussed this, I think, quite quite constructively. We've come with ideas on how to improve it. But we can't even start to look to improve this until we understand what it's based on. Now, previously, if a minister isn't getting up to answer questions, we can rely on the regulatory impact statement to give us an idea. But it's quite clear, when this is read, that the government didn't give departments enough time to actually come up with analysis to assist Parliament. And that's not the department's fault. It's another example of the government cutting corners to try to avoid scrutiny, which makes it even more important that the minister stands up and answers questions. But if we dive into the regulatory impact statement enough, we will see that the government's claims that this bill will help the housing crisis appear to be unfounded. I say appear because it hasn't been able to reach that conclusion because they weren't given enough time. And the only way that we can get to that conclusion, or otherwise, is if the minister answers questions. So I'll bring it right back to the most basic point. In the absence of a response, once the minister does respond, we will certainly have more questions, but I'll keep it real simple. How does this bill help solve the housing crisis? There's no mention in this bill about building houses. And actually, we've got to look at this bill and this part in the context of the other changes that this government has made. Because the minister needs to answer that pretty simple question in the context of them reversing the changes the previous government made around interest deductibility, in the context that, at least in part, but I would argue predominantly because of that change, rents have gone up 7%, according to the regulatory impact statement, in the year leading up to this. What is going on here? We need to know from the minister how this is going to solve the housing crisis.
Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Tama Potaka.
Thank you for the opportunity to stand and respond to some of the questions today. I was really unfortunate I was unable to sit in the chair in relation to the pet bonds because that's quite an issue dear to my heart here in the fishbowl of Wellington. The changes that have been proposed in this part of the Act, sensible, much needed, and remove some of the barriers to ensure supply and flexibility for landlords in the market. Of course, there's been some observations, may I say allegations, around rent increasing as a result of some of these changes. But as we know, rents have dramatically increased over the last 5 or 6 years, and over the last 12 months there's been some stabilising of rent. But rents do get influenced by a number of matters. For example, immigration, supply, wage growth, and it's clear to us that an increase of an average of $170 over the 6 years prior to the 2023 election, despite an extraordinary amount of coin being tipped into the housing market by way of subsidies and build costs, despite that, rents continue to increase. Despite some of the current arrangements around terminations being put in place, rents continue to increase at a pace that has actually contributed significantly to the cost of living catastrophe that has faced ordinary New Zealanders, including those ones in West Auckland. The view that changes is that changes will increase supply, and whilst that might come as a surprise to our colleagues on the other side of the whare, it is our view that the changes that are being proposed, in the context that are being proposed and together, will increase supply at the margins by giving landlords great flexibility to rent to tenants and to a broader suite of tenants. And that's something that I've obviously witnessed, being involved in the property sector myself for the last 2 decades. And the sense that, and the view that our team has on this side of the house, is that by making these changes, we're able to see a lot more landlords be interested in broadening the suite of tenants and people who may rent homes, rented at tenancies from those landlords, because there's an increasing flexibility to deal with some complexities which currently cannot be dealt with under the current legislation. You actually get more choice for access by tenants, and whilst there have been some observations around 52.8% of property associations and landlords opposing the change. Actually, within some of those associations and groups who presented or who submitted during the select committee process, there are a number who submitted on behalf of many, many other landlords. So yes, acknowledge the submitters and the percentage of submitters, but when you actually get to the percentage of landlords opposing or not opposing, we don't, and we haven't been able to penetrate that number. And whilst there are some observations around the reletting and the impact on the tightness of the market, recent evidence suggests that actually the time taken to relet properties is actually longer, suggesting that the changes and the approaches that we have made actually shown that the tightness in the market is easing. So again, we believe that there is a sensible, much needed change, and that's captured here in this part of the Act. We do believe that it will increase flexibility for landlords, but also generate a greater opportunity for tenants to access rental arrangements. Very sensible, and I commend Minister Bishop for his hard work on this matter.
More commentary.
Yeah. Okay, there was a lot of flexibility being done by Tama there in terms of logic. Okay, this is not a pro-tenant bill. Yes, okay. There is one aspect of the bill that does help out tenants, which is the pet bonds, but whether or not one can own a pet or not is an issue with renters. But the rest of it is so stacked in favour of landlords, especially when you look at it in combination with interest deductibility, which based on rental properties, which allows landlords to deduct their mortgage interest costs from their rental income, which reduces the amount of taxable income and in turn tax owed. So yeah, it's like, let's not kid ourselves here. This is a pro-landlord bill.
And also, like, the other thing is, how many of these landlords are reporting to the IRD they're doing things like maintenance, but not doing maintenance?
Good question.
That's the other thing that goes in there is because, like, in a normal tax return, like when I file my IR for an IR team for the business, I don't get asked to provide a ton of receipts to back up that case or bank statements or anything. It is taken at the goodness of my word. Now, that's for my business. And I mean, this was in days when I was filing the tax returns, not when now I've got an accountant again, the accountant files that, which reduces the need of doing that. But how many, landlords are saying they're doing the right thing on paper, but not doing the right thing at all, and probably don't have the invoices or the receipts to back up they're doing the right thing?
But from reading the bill, there's nowhere in the bill which says that you have to provide evidence of what you use,
Or
what you're doing.
even if you say deduct a bond, the only time you have to provide evidence is usually if it goes to tribunal when there's a dispute.
Yep.
So yeah, you could sit there, and I mean, that was proven that there was one particular person who used the same receipt on a bond deduction across multiple tenancies, and it was only got called out when the same adjudicator who adjudicated over a previous case go, that's the same receipt, I've seen that before. Because, I mean, serial litigants, they are known at the tribunal.
100%. Yeah, it's just another Tuesday to them. They literally consider it to be like part of the cost of doing business. I think that the thing to acknowledge is like, okay, what is the actual material reality of this bill? What is the intent? And ultimately, like, what National is looking to do and how they're planning to justify this bill is the argument that it's going to give some people the confidence to enter the private rental market as suppliers that otherwise wouldn't. Here's the thing that I haven't seen anybody acknowledge, though. There are some people that you don't want as suppliers in the private rental market, period. Yeah. Because they're look, I mean, I don't know what the rules are around language, but they're fucking horrible. They're horrible people, and they're horrible service providers. And it's not even a service, right? Like extracting an economic rent is not the provision of a service; it's theft. But that's a discussion for another time, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you can be rude to your tenants and get away with that. But if you go, excuse me, bitch, but don't sit there and tell me, you're going to be having cow's milk whether you like it or not, and what is the customer going to do? Walk away and probably never come back to my business.
That's right. Yeah.
You can
but if it's someone's home, 100%. And the other thing too, right, is like, even if we're talking about rental prices, like something that Tommy himself acknowledged during his speech is that rental prices are not primarily dictated by costs. Right? No. They're primarily dictated by what the market can afford to bear, which is really just a sanitized way of saying, like, what's the most that we can extract from tenants? That's the reality of it. So, like, this whole interest deductibility thing was a nice tax holiday for landlords and has had, like, very little to no material impact on the actual cost of rentals themselves. The one thing that, ironically enough, arguably might, if it drums up a little bit more supply in the market. But here's the thing, you also have to consider the quality of the supply, right? Somebody who was unwilling to enter the private rental market as a supplier, as a landlord previously, because they didn't want to deal with the reality of tenants having the ability to dispute an eviction. Like, these are not people that you actually want as providers in a community for rentals. Like, that's unhinged. Like, and I think that's the thing that I'm just so shocked hasn't been part of this discussion, right? Is because, like, the reality is, and here's the other real reason why National is doing this, right? It's because they want people with insecure tenancies and who otherwise would not be eligible for the private rental market out of social housing and into the private rental market. Because in order to access social housing in New Zealand, the primary question is not whether or not you can afford the private rental market the way that it used to be, right? And instead, what it now is a question of whether or not you have access to the private rental market. Cost is a very lowly consideration, even though it should be the highest, right? But it's typically people that have like some kind of custody or family court issues, or like criminal behavior past, antisocial, et cetera, right? That for those reasons are excluded from the private rental market. Here's the thing, though. If you put those people in the private rental market into extremely insecure tenancies, like, this isn't going to promote a lot of pro-social outcomes for anybody, right? Like, okay, it's like you're out of social housing now, but now you're going into like these terrible tenancies that, or these homes are likely also going to fall below standards. Because the other thing too that I wish I could remember the name of the paper or the article off the top of my head, but like I remember reading recently that there was like a correlation between the insecurity of a tenancy and the quality of the housing stock. And would you be surprised to find out the more insecure your tenancy is, the worse the quality of the housing stock is? And then if we think to the impact that has on our health system and on our people, it's just, the whole thing is bad. It shouldn't exist.
Yeah, slumlords. This is basically National's way of trying to line their own pockets.
It's not a pro-landlord bill. It's a pro-slumlord bill. You're 100% right.
Now, here's one thing I want to ask is, are letting fees back on the cards? Or is that something that has been killed for good?
Sorry, could you provide a little more context about familiar?
So what used to happen was, if you were a property manager, you could charge a 1 week letting fee. In addition, it had to be part of it. It was a maximum total of 6 weeks, but you used to charge a letting fee, which is usually 1 week's rent plus GST for securing the rental, which was removed back in 2019 to deal with the 2019 or 2018, because the fee should have belonged with the landlord who owned the property, not with the tenant who's moving in.
I didn't see that in the bill. I do know that currently landlords or their agents can't charge letting fees.
So that possibly means that letting fees have gone. They have not reintroduced letting fees.
Sorry, I'm confused. I don't recall that being a part of the discussion.
I don't think that was part of the bill, but that was an old law, and you know how this is bringing back some of the status quos of the old laws.
Oh, are you like making the rhetorical point that we're bringing back like horrible vestiges of the law that
we might forget about letting fees?
Right. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Maybe don't draw attention to that issue, Sam. Don't give them any ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's past third reading. They can't put it as an SOP.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get to the third reading speeches, and let's go to the Bish from the Hut.
Well,
You're going to move this for a third time.
Okay. I've sent a legislative statement, which I'm assuming will eventually be published under the authority of the House. And I move that the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Mr Speaker, the bill makes a number of changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, as we've been discussing at quite some considerable length during the committee stage. And I do want to just thank opposition members for the very useful and constructive questions and comments that were made through the committee stage. And I enjoyed participating. I'm just a bit sorry I couldn't be there for all of the debate, but I was there for a decent chunk of it. And it was, I think, a good example of how the committee stage can help ventilate issues and, maybe over time improve the law. So that was good to see. We are a pro-tenant government and a pro-landlord government, and I don't believe there's at a basic level there's not a fundamental contradiction around that. And most importantly,
are you sure about
we
that?
are a pro-cheaper housing government, because rents in this country are too high, house prices are too high, and we have severe housing affordability challenges. The 2023 census data that was released last week, I think, made very clear. I won't litigate that for the House, but everyone in the House is aware of the appalling state of housing in this country. So this is a suite of sensible pro-tenant and pro-landlord changes to encourage landlords to enter the market, give tenants more ability to secure a rental home, including for their furry family member, or indeed non-furry as well. So it increases flexibility and support for landlords to end tenancies, aiming to remove barriers to increasing private rental housing supply, as well as other changes. So we've well canvassed in the House the changes to the tenancy termination provisions in the RTA that will largely return the law to what it was pre-2020. It also reduces, Mr Speaker, changes the rule around the rollover of fixed-term tenancies into periodic tenancies, which is a technical change, but will, I think, make a difference on the margins in markets like Dunedin, Queenstown, and interestingly, I'm advised also Waiheke Island, where a lot of people who would otherwise put their rental houses into the rental market on a fixed term, but are essentially disincentivised to do so because of the near automatic rollover of the fixed term into a periodic tenancy. So it doesn't give them any flexibility or discretion. And as a result, those houses just sit on Airbnb when they could otherwise be in the private rental market. And strong feedback from Queenstown, for example, in 2022 and 3 is that is having a really deleterious effect on the Queenstown rental housing market. Now, clearly there are wider issues in the Queenstown housing market that we need to address, most notably the supply of land and infrastructure funding and financing, and we've got work underway around those as well. I do think it will make a difference at the margins. We've dealt with the issues to do with pet bonds. This is a very positive move for tenants. It will have a positive effect on well-being, and with the way our rental market is, Mr. Speaker, it is challenging and sometimes impossible for tenants with pets to find pet-friendly rentals, and so we are embarking on changes which we think will have. Thank you. See, the members often get a smile out of the Honourable Karen McAnally.
Please stop the puns.
Not a sausage, Mr. Speaker, but. Yeah, well, exactly. We've talked about the greyhounds a lot this morning. It's a great day for animals in New Zealand, particularly greyhounds. It's a great week actually. So anyway, I wouldn't give them an exemption. We went through that. I'm not going to relitigate that one. So the major change here is that the bill. What's that? A good day for cat ladies. I'm not going to go there. You mentioned it. I'm not going to go there. We've got a cat as well. We've got a cat as well. That's right. R.I.P. Buzz. So the major change is that we are essentially reversing what we have at the moment, which is making it easier for tenants to have a pet, and landlords can only withhold consent on reasonable grounds. There was a long debate back and forth this morning about what reasonableness means. There's non-exhaustive definitions in the bill, and as I said to the House this morning, there's 140 mentions of the word reasonable in the RTA. The bill enables landlords to require a pet bond if they've agreed their tenant can keep a pet up to the equivalent of 2 weeks' rent. Only one pet bond per tenancy can be required at any one time, even if there's more than one pet. It includes pet consent rules, clarify the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords relating to pets and rental properties. Landlord has to provide a written response to a tenant's pet request within 21 days, stating whether or not they agree with a debate about whether or not 21 was the right number or not. Happy to see how that goes, and we can always change it later. Some submitters thought the term reasonable grounds was too subjective, but as I said before, the word reasonable is consistent with other provisions in the Act. It's important to note that pet conditions must be reasonable, having regard to the nature of the premises and the type of pet. The bill makes tenants liable for the cost of damage caused as a result of keeping a pet that is not fair wear and tear, and this change addresses landlord concerns about excessive pet damage costs and incentivises tenants to take additional care in rental properties. Disability assistance dogs were debated at length this morning, particularly by the Greens. The bill expressly excludes disability dogs as pets, and it's in the interpretation section. These pet provisions, sir, are a win-win. Landlords will have assurance they're not out of pocket for possible damage to their rentals, and tenants will have more rental options, so I think the changes are pretty awesome. The bill also makes a whole range of other amendments. Common sense approach to the issue of smoking, which has been a concern for the sector, clarifying that smoking inside premises can be prohibited. It clarifies and strengthens retaliatory termination provisions, providing it is unlawful for a landlord to serve a termination notice in retaliation to a tenant enforcing their rights or in response to legally enforceable actions taken against the landlord by others. It's a pro-tenant move, and supports efficiency in the tribunal, enabling adjudicators to make decisions on the papers by reference to documents submitted by parties where appropriate. Mr. Speaker, this is a good step forward for a whole range of different reasons, most notably the pet bond provisions, but most importantly it will provide a bit of extra incentive for landlords to enter the rental market. They are an important part of our property market, they are an important part of our housing situation. Ultimately, as I always say to people in relation to housing, the long-term answers to our housing solution are more houses. We need more rental properties, we need more social houses, we need more market houses, we need more affordable properties. The ultimate answer to all of these issues is land supply, urban zoning, infrastructure funding and financing. We've got work underway around that. This is a positive step in the right direction, and I commend it all to the House. The Minister presented a legislative statement, and it is published under the authority of the House. The Honourable Karen McAnally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When we did the second reading speech, it came after the Minister spending the entire speech talking about pet bonds. And I thought today...
Okay, sorry, Stacey just messaged that's the reason why I forgot to sit there and stop at that speech there. The Bish.
The Bish. The Bish is a man of contradictions. It's like, oh, we need more houses. Okay, why are filled jobs down? Again, what's going on here, mate?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I don't agree with it, but I do get it. It's the reason why they removed the dual mandate from the Reserve Bank. Their particular economic policy necessitates a certain level of unemployment, and then they also go to make the lives of the unemployed significantly more difficult through the changes they're making through MSD to try and like curtail the impact of, again, this is the most charitable interpretation I can think of, right? To try and curtail the impact of the planned increase in unemployment and get people back into the productive economy as quickly as possible. But the part that is hypocritical, albeit they don't know that, is seeing housing in New Zealand as part of the productive economy. It's anything but.
I mean,
like when you build a house, sure.
Yeah, I mean, this bill is
everything
just,
else.
This bill is just one big Mott and Bailey. It's a logical fallacy. The way how they're talking about pet bonds, they're using it as a means to hide the fact that there are 90-day no-clause terminations back on the table.
Yeah.
They're really doing their best to hide that fact. And it's like, no, I'm not going to ignore that. I'm not. Pet bonds, no one's got a problem with those. Everyone's got a problem with the 90-day no-cause evictions.
I mean, why can't it be split into two bills like they were forced to do with the district court judge increasing number of judges amendment bill? It was something like Paul Goldsmith wanted two pieces of legislation put into one that, and it was something like if they split into two, the whole House would unanimously support the increasing number of judges, but not the other one. And this is possibly another segment of, if these bills were split into two bills, they could have actually had a better quality piece of legislation.
Why are they lumped together? Are they that eager to save money? It's like, no, just have them as two separate bills.
You know why.
We know why, yeah.
Try and put Poison's chalice into the legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue hearing from Kieran.
Given that this third reading speech happened straight after the committee stage, where we have spent some time diving, or attempting to, and understanding the government's rationale with the significant changes to tenancy rules under this bill, that perhaps they might try and change their approach. Try this time not to fool people into thinking that this bill is all about pets. It's not. It's not even mentioned on the front page, and it talks about the bill summary. There are 5 bullet points, and every single one of them talk about the reduction of tenant rights proposed in this bill, the reduction of notice periods, the reintroduction of no-cause terminations. But if you listen to that third reading speech, people would be forgiven that it was actually about something different altogether. Thank God for legislative statements, because if people came back to this day and listened to what the minister had to say, they would be forgiven for thinking this had nothing to do with tenancy altogether, but it does. It is the guts of this bill, and it is the reason why we cannot support it. The pet bond stuff makes sense, and I wish that it was actually in a different bill so that we could vote for it. The changes to give landlords clarity around rules restricting smoking inside absolutely makes sense. The inclusion of a dependent on the provisions, special provisions for those that find themselves regrettably in a family violence situation, we support that. But none of that outweighs the destructive changes that this bill does. And the gall of the minister to stand up and say that this government is a pro-tenant government. Rubbish. And to stand up and to say that today is a good day for those that are looking to find a house amidst this housing crisis. Again, rubbish. There is nothing in this bill that is going to help people into a home. If this bill was about building houses, sure. But this bill is about making it easier for landlords and making it harder for tenants. And the premise behind this is the government argues, not that you'd know from the minister's third reading speech, but the government argues that if you make it easier for landlords, there will be more landlords and therefore more rentals. But it is a flawed logic in the context of the current housing situation in this country. When the government has essentially ended new builds for Kaingaroa post 2026 and has significantly reduced funding for community housing providers and has tightened up the criteria for entry into emergency housing to the extent that during Scrutiny Week MHUD said that this is playing a part in increasing levels of homelessness, and now we have this. All of those things are government's decisions. And then to top it off, the government's solution to this is to make it easier for landlords to kick tenants out. Now, even if their argument was right, that these changes would increase more landlords or incentivise more landlords into the market, if the government isn't incentivising house builds through Kaingaroa or community housing or other means, what that means is that first home buyers will be locked out of the market. Because another decision that the government made, that this bill needs to be seen in the context of, is their decision to reintroduce interest deductibility. Now, that still applied to new builds. It did not apply to existing homes. And what was seen was that investment shifted from existing homes into new builds. That's been taken away now, and it's an important piece to understand the full picture of the housing crisis. Consents are down. home builds are down. The number of new home owners entering the market is down. 12,000 construction workers have lost their jobs since this government took office. That's important because the government stood there and said this bill will help the housing crisis. The only way it will do that is to incentivise new landlords entering the market. They're not entering the market by building homes. So they are competing with potential first home buyers on existing homes. And that drives house prices up. We know it does. It's done it in the past, and we're set to make the same mistakes as a country. And I find that really sad. Because when the Minister Bishop, stands up and says he wants to solve the housing crisis, I actually believe him. The problem is that the policies that he is introducing to this parliament don't back that up. And so if we accept the government's rationale that these changes will mean more landlords in the market, that means that there will be fewer first home buyers, prices go up, landlords pay more for houses, they need higher rents to reap their investment back. This is bad news. All for what? Why? Why is this the priority? Of all the things that the government could do to address the lack of rentals in this country, they've chosen to make it easier for landlords to kick tenants out without showing any evidence at all that there was actually a problem. If the government came to the House and demonstrated clear data to show that the changes that were made to tenancy laws by the previous government were actually stopping people finding rentals, then they might have a case. But we pleaded with them during the committee stage to show us that evidence. Point us towards a source. Point us to any sort of data set. They couldn't do it because this won't do what they said it would do. It does some good things. I would have liked the bill to have done more. I think it is actually a shame that the Minister didn't accept my amendment put forward at the committee stage to make those greyhounds that are coming out of the industry as a result of the pending ban to be exempt from the pet bond for 4 years. And the flip side of that was that a landlord would have been able to claim 2 weeks more rent than what they are currently allowed to if there are damages. It meant that the landlord wasn't worse off, but it meant that there was no barrier to a tenant taking in a greyhound, and it would have helped a lot with the pending influx of extra greyhounds. I think that is a genuine shame, but I hope that the Minister is true to his word that he said that he will go look into it, and I encourage the government to seriously consider that. We are going to have to need some provisions to help home these greyhounds. This would have been a real practical way to do it. But nevertheless, that still actually wouldn't have changed our position on this, even though it was my amendment, and I would have loved the government to have accepted it, because at the end of the day, there is enough evidence already available to show, as a combination of things, when you make it easier for landlords to kick tenants out, as this bill does, and the government doesn't encourage the building of houses, and it pulls back on Kaingaora, and it slows down the momentum of community housing providers, and it stops people entering emergency housing, what does that all add up to? Unaffordable rents, unaffordable house prices, and increased homelessness. Does that remind anyone of anything? The 9 years of the John Key government? Been there, done that, and here we are again. Back to the future. Not back on track. Back to the same old tired policies that benefit landlords but don't benefit everybody else.
Okay, so it felt like there needed to be some music played in the background with Kieran.
I mean, he's right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because like the part for me, right, is like, where was this labor the last 3 years? You know, like there was so much stuff. Kieran in particular alienated so many people during that horrible interview he did with Jack Tame, discussing the whole Three Waters thing, right? Like, we needed that like infrastructure reform, and instead the government got so hung up on this like legitimately contestable aspect of interpreting like a severe constitutional question that needs to be answered in New Zealand around like whether or not the treaty establishes a partnership or a union. I think there is legitimacy to both arguments. But there was this arrogance from Kieran in particular that there's only one legitimate view around the treaty, which is like not supported even by like top Māori like historical minds like Sir Apita Ngata, who was like very firm in what he understood the treaty to mean and be, and the way that it established a union, right, rather than a partnership. And that insistence on there being a one legitimate view that then ultimately undermined the entire water infrastructure project altogether, which is so utterly disappointing. Like, why the hell did Labour choose to make that thing their hill to die on when you have so many extremely real political and material pressures that are impacting people every single day, like all people, right? And I just, for me, I would like to think that I'm at least somewhat consistent in my views, that like the most important concern that I have is like, what are the material consequences to our people going to be when we legislate anything, right? Yeah. And it just, it boggles the mind why labor seemed to attach itself to this, like, again, I can understand and I can sympathize with where some of that's coming from, but like, what issue is going to be at the top of our priorities, right? Yeah. Like, this is the kind of opposition, like these are the kinds of things that he should have been discussing in an interview with Jack Dame, not literally like making quotes saying like, one person, one vote, strictly academic definitions, and kind of laughing it away like the fundamental democratic principle of any democratic nation is literally a punchline, right? Like people do not have a unanimous view on that, and for good reason, mind you. Right? Like, and that's not even me like entirely discrediting like where he's coming from and all that, but it's like that's the primary reason why labor lost so violently. And like now in opposition, they're trying to like recollect. I'm so disappointed by the Labour Party's inability to perform and actually deliver. And that's not an endorsement of National. I hate it when that happens too. Like, just, I would hope to think that the viewers here like have it enough brains. But I sometimes I talk about this on my page.
They would sit there and they're not as they're not as stupid as say the American approach of, well, if you criticize the Democrats, you must be supporting the Republicans and vice versa, which is not at all like, and I mean, that was even in Wellington with the way how people voted, how the fact that in Wellington, they voted in 2 Green MPs to give the screw you to Labour instead of National MPs.
So in an emergency, smash the box that releases this version of Labour. That's what this Labour Party must have done.
Yeah.
Where was this Labour Party?
I think
they were in the emergency box.
For me, right, I feel like a Labour Party in principle should primarily exist to advocate for the rights of labourers. Yeah. Right? And
it's in the name.
Exactly. One would think, right? But instead, I'm not going to say the last 6 years, because honestly, like, Winston caught a lot of flack for putting Labour in 2017, but like that particular Labour government was honestly not that bad. It's the following 3 years where they just fumbled the bag on so many levels and failed everybody, right? Yeah. They failed the national voters they spent so much time courting, and they failed the Labour voters whom their interest they sacrificed at the expense of trying to court these national voters that they were never going to keep happy in the first place.
It's the mistake that all the centrist parties make, my friend.
Yep. Okay, let's see from one of those people who took a Wellington electorate, Tamitha Paul.
It's with sadness that I address the House on this bill tonight, because I don't own a home. Probably won't for a while, even with all of the different tools and mechanisms and privilege that I do have access to as a Member of Parliament. But I know in my experience pre-being an MP that, as renters, we don't ask for a lot. We're only asking for a roof over our head. We're only asking that when we pay our rent on time, that we get the entitlements that are legally provided for.
Then you will enjoy living in a motley home
where we don't get sick from the black mold all over the roof. We only ask that the bathrooms that we use, that the hot water is running. We only ask that there aren't mushrooms growing out of the shower. We
I
ask
like
that the roof
those
doesn't
mushrooms.
leak on our head. But somehow in Aotearoa, that's become too much to ask for. But actually, we don't ask for what we deserve, because there's more than 1 million of us. And I read a quote. It's interesting. It's been interesting being based in Wellington Central and reading about the slumlords that used to exist in our urban centres, and how back in the day is so similar to how things are now for renters in New Zealand. Because somehow if you live in one of those slum houses and one of those slum flats that has become normalised in our country, you're looked down upon. And this bill is an example of the way that you are looked down upon. But if you own the slums, if you're a slumlord and you own 20 of those things, somehow our society privileges that. Somehow our society and our systems applaud that kind of behaviour. Because at the end of the day, this bill is actually about the rich getting richer. Because we live in a country where housing isn't treated as a human right. It's treated as an opportunity for people to make money. And that to me is morally bankrupt. Because as I've said over and over and over again on this bill, how can anybody be expected to live a decent life if they don't have a roof over their head? And the answer to that is obvious and clear. You can't. You can't live a decent or meaningful life. You can't go and get a job. You can't look after yourself. You can't raise your family.
She's telling me black mold is actually bad?
Now, today we've spent the entire day canvassing this bill and trying to understand, trying to give the government the benefit of the doubt, actually, to actually try and see, is there a basis for this decision? We asked over and over and over again, we asked the Minister of Housing, we asked the Associate Minister of Housing, what is the evidential basis that underpins the rhetoric that this government has provided around bringing back no-cause evictions? And they tell us over and over again, it's about helping landlords and property managers take a chance on riskier tenants. Well, first of all, what is a risky tenant? Who are we talking about when we're saying these so-called risky tenants? Are we talking about Māori?
I know the answer to that question. It's Māori people.
Are we talking about disabled people? Like, if you're going to say that that's your rationale, then be very clear and very specific about who it is that you're talking about. And also, even if that was the case, then where is the evidence to show that this would even allow for property managers and landlords to take a chance? Because that doesn't exist. And that's because this bill is simply a product of the coalition agreement, the infamous coalition agreement that somehow happens to supersede every other agreement, every other treaty, every other international convention in this country. And they've decided that that's what they're going to do. And so they've worked backwards. They've worked backwards to try and make the evidence work and to try and make a case for no-cause evictions. But it hasn't worked, because you look at the regulatory impact statement, you look at the evidence, you look at the data, you listen to the people that came and spoke to us about this bill, and it becomes clear that there is no basis for this bill. It's purely political. And even with the policy problem, there are so many ways that you could try and encourage landlords to take a chance on riskier tenants. There are lots of different ways that you can make this work. But no, the outcome was already determined within the coalition agreement, and so that's what they've pursued. But it's really strange that they've pursued that, because there's not even support within the property industry for no-cause evictions, because 53% of people who submitted on this bill, who were representing property managers or landlords, or were themselves those two things, don't even support this bill. And then you look at the public's perspective, 97% of people don't support this bill. So there's actually not a lot of support for this bill, but I think the government knows that and understands that. And like my colleague Kieran McAnulty was saying, that's why they've couched it in all the fluff. They've fluffed it up so that it detracts from the fact that there is no basis for no-cause evictions. And the reason there is no basis for no-cause evictions, because you look at the way that they have, that kind of law has been applied around the world, and it has resulted in nothing but increased homelessness and chaos and destruction of people's lives. And the fact that it's been couched in all this fluff and the pet bonds, which we could get into that as well, because the pet bond provisions aren't even as great as they've been touted to be, it's been couched in all this fluff because I think that the government is ashamed to be bringing back no-cause evictions. And sadly, as we watch the results and the destruction that will come from this decision that we are about to make, sadly, we're going to look back at this and we are all going to feel ashamed that we allowed this to happen. But I'm not surprised, because we've got a pro-landlord government. We've got a government made up of politicians who we're made up of a government who, by and large, own multiple properties. And that is the problem. There should be more people in this room who have never owned a property in their house, because maybe then we'd get better decisions that actually treat housing as the human right that it needs to be treated as. But the thing is we live in a democracy, and there are actually more of us than there are of you. There are more renters in this country than there are landlords, and I think that, thank you for doing this no-cause evictions, Mahi, because I think renters will actually recognise their power in numbers and utilise that, and this is going to be a one-term government. Not just because of all of this, but because of everything else that the government has decided to do. So let's use the last 2 minutes to talk about solutions, because that's a big piece of criticism that we always get. We're always quick to point out the harm, but we never point out the solutions. So I'll tell you what the solutions are. First of all, we need rent controls, because they might never understand what it feels like to have an unexpected rent increase sprung on you at a time where you don't have the financial means to actually pay that rent, and the anxiety and the despair that it causes people when those kinds of decisions are sprung on them. So we need rent controls. We need a rental warrant of fitness system that actually looks at the dilapidated and poor and disgusting state of rental housing in New Zealand, speaking from someone living in Wellington, where we are notorious for the quality of our housing. But most importantly, we need a mass public housing build program, because the core problem here is capitalism. And it's the way, and it is the way, funny, that's always the root of all problems. We always arrive back at that point, don't we, guys? We always arrive back at that point. Because in this country, we treat housing like a game of Monopoly, like a business, like a thing to be profited off of, and that is fundamentally and morally bankrupt. Because again, people don't get to choose whether or not they have a house over their head or a roof over their head. People don't get to make that option. You cannot live a meaningful or decent or productive life, economy people, if you don't have a roof over your head. So that's why we are in full, staunch opposition to this bill, and we'll continue to do so, and look forward to putting our rental policies in place in 2026. Kia ora.
Now, I'd like to bring up something
socialist hat.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up something about Kiwi Skirt has just put up there. I can confirm from the 2022 campaign, Tim for Paul spent $24,700 on a campaign, which was the highest non-mayoral candidate spending for the 2022 local body elections. So I think that might actually explain partly what she is saying, because I'll be honest, if I had a councillor's salary of over $100,000 a year, followed by an MP's salary of $170,000 a year, I probably would have quadrupled the size of my KiwiSaver. I probably would. I wouldn't be feeling like on the bones of my ass with $25,000 a year, which is what I'm earning, or business is about $65,000 a year. Basically, it's that might be evident on her own ones. I can tell you right now, I probably would be better at saving. I mean, I'm someone who, I feel like I'm broke all the time, but I can tell you right now, I don't have a vehicle that breaks down.
I am not going to comment on any Green Party member's financial situation. That is not no. I'm going to step away from that discussion with a 10-foot poll.
And I'm just thinking, just to put that into context, I do also know. I think it was Wellington Central was one of the highest. It wasn't the highest green electoral spend, but it was near up there. The highest green electoral spend was actually Rongotai Julian Genter, who, yes, I do believe she does own her house in the Rongotai electorate, because I think she lived. Berhampore is the suburb she lives in, because that was where she rode the bike from to Wellington Hospital to give birth to her second child.
Yeah. Right. I think. Oh, sorry. You go on, Laura.
No, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna give a monologue, but I got distracted.
Yeah, right. No biggie. Yeah, I think I just wanted to. I don't know if there was much more of the show left, but I think I've kind of exhausted everything there is to say on this particular issue. I think I'll probably be signing off. But yeah, it was definitely it was a good speech to end it off on. I agree with most of what she said, so it's good.
You sure you don't want to wait for Cameron Luxton?
Oh yeah, bring him on.
Yeah, I think I've 90 minutes is probably around the max of what I can justify.
Cameron wins the dipshit of the day award. So yeah, well, let's play.
Right, cool.
Well,
Thanks,
there's a bit of a
guys.
dark cloud hanging over that side of the house, isn't there? Let's try to brighten things up a little bit. This is a great day, not just for landlords, but for tenants as well. Because when you separate people against each other and you say tenants are getting this and landlords are getting that, all you're doing is making a conflict where there doesn't need to be one. To have a landlord, you must have a tenant. To have a tenant, you must have the landlord. To have that relationship, you have to have a property. And what this government has done by following through on what the ACT Party campaigned for and this coalition government has signed up to do is restore confidence in a market which operates when participants come together with mutual respect and dignity, have a chance for both to express their ways and their rights and privileges. Those people need to be able to come together and supply one another with what they need. A landlord needs someone to occupy their house who looks after it, who respects it, who pays the rent, who treats their neighbours with care, who doesn't diminish the property value. A tenant needs a landlord who looks after their property, maintains it, buys it in the first place. Actually, let's go back a few steps. Works hard, saves, invests, and buys one, and then allows someone to occupy that property. What we end up with is a relationship, and that relationship is going to be going back to the way it was when we had people who respected each other rather than holding each other to ransom. And Madam Speaker, I have to say that was the feeling that the property investing community, the landlords as they've been tagged over there, have been feeling. And what the downstream effect of this feeling is you end up with people who don't want to take risks, not just on tenants, but actually on even supplying a property to the market. Even being a landlord, people don't want to take that risk. Because if you have got your hard work and capital invested in a property, and then you have no ability to guide the way it is looked after, the way the person who is occupying it treats it, why would you take that risk? And I think we need people taking a punt in New Zealand, saying, I want to invest my capital in a way that supplies to the market, who needs it. And the market, I know you say, the people who care about economy on this side of the house. The economy is a way to describe the way our society operates. It's when people coming together with mutual benefit, and that is what we are trying to bring back to this country. Madam Speaker, there was earlier conversation today in the House, so I hesitate to use this term, but there has been described a war on landlords previously. And I think what we are seeing now is the end to that so described by others in the past conflict, and which was causing a vast amount of collateral damage to tenants, I think what we are seeing is an ending of hostilities in that particular sphere of New Zealand's psyche. But I have to say, after listening to the speeches on the other side, it's more of just a détente on that sort of the side. It's just a pausing in hostilities. You can hear us waiting for that power so that they can come in and say to people, I demand you do this with the property that you own. You've invested your life into this product or this property or this asset, and I demand you do what I say. That is just something that we cannot go back to in this country, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we had a speech poorly delivered, not a lot of passion, by Mr. Kieran McAnulty. I mean, he's the hardest working MP in the Labor Party, so you can forgive him for being a bit exhausted at this point in the week, but he asked for what is this government doing to get some more houses? Well, Mr. McAnulty, the market needs to have more houses. I agree with you, and this government is doing multiple things to it. I won't digress too far, Madam Speaker, and feel free to pull me up, but we've got a cost of housing which makes it harder for people to actually build houses to deliver to each other, and that means that we need to do things like sorting out the products that go into houses that become rental properties. That's going through the Building Act and making it easier to bring products in from overseas, something that we've campaigned for and this government is delivering. We're making interest deductibility come back, not as fast as I would perhaps like to see it, but faster than it would have without us. We've got things like RMA reform, which the Minister earlier this week has indicated will be coming before this House, and that is something that has been sorely needed in this country so we can actually build places for each other to live, for each other to work, and so that we can produce an economy which will provide for others, because that is what we're all about. This bill, Madam Speaker, simplifies a few things as well. Oh, actually, hang on. There was another part in there that I'd like to address. We had Tamatha Paul say things like, all a tenant asks for is a long list of not a mouldy house, not a leaky roof, just all I want is a roof over our head. And that is a very fair comment. You do want to just have a roof over your head. You do just want to have a safe, warm place to live. We don't get those by punishing the people who are supplying it, and that is the feeling from the people who are supplying it. I come today to this House to report that the property industry who invest and trying to be good landlords have felt under pressure. They have been exiting. They have been less risk-taking. Now, you could say risk-taking, that's a bit of a favourite word, but they've taken less risk. And you can say, well, you know, they're going to take a punt on I can't remember the language that was being used over there to try and denigrate tenants who were probably not top of the list when it comes to property inspections. But I think if you allow people to take risks, you will get more people housed. If you allow people to take risk, you will not just get more people who wouldn't have been housed. You will get people who have been housed and they want to move up into a different part of the community, as in they want to move into a part of the community with house. I don't think so, Mr. Bailey. I'm perfectly enjoying the speech right now because this is something that we have asked for a long time. New Zealand has asked for it for a long time. It is a place in New Zealand that needs to have a functioning property market. The ACT Party heard from the communities that were affected. We represented them into Parliament. We did things like the PET bond, Madam Speaker. The PET bond was it's not just a piece of fluff tag on the end. This is an important part of what makes somebody feel at home, is when they have their companion animal or their ability to get a pet. I think we've heard from many people who have seen the benefit of this. And you could tell by the first part of this bill's committee stage, Madam Speaker, where the opposition say, look, we have some quibbles with it, and I think fair enough that you could say could be more, could be less, could be defined. We don't want to leave it up. We want it to be more strict on what sort of pets. But I think we've landed in a good space. I think it's a credit to the ACT Party for bringing this idea to the House so that people can have the life that they would like to choose and just pay a small 2 weeks of bond for the privilege of having an animal in someone else's property, which is their home. So, Madam Speaker, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Right, Shit of the Year award goes to that man. Okay, so let's talk about what's wrong with everything he just said. And I wrote a monologue because that's how triggered I was. Yeah, he triggered the lib. Okay, so the problem with no-cause terminations is that it removes mutual respect between the tenant and the landlord. It removes security for low-income renters. It creates a greater power imbalance in the market that has a shortage of housing. Tenants may be more reluctant to raise issues of concern and assert their rights without fear of losing accommodation. This bill does not limit how much a landlord can increase the bond or rent by. This is not a pro-tenant bill. This is a pro-landlord bill, especially when paired with the interest deductibility on rental properties, which allows landlords to deduct their mortgage interest costs from their rental income, reducing taxable income and in turn tax owed. So this guy can do something called fuck off.
I mean, put it the other way is, if you have here's the part that actually makes me cringe. There is a requirement to have contents insurance as tenant is to have the landlord having the house up to a reasonable standard. But if the landlord refuses to do that, they could void the tenant's insurance policy. But then at the same time, they'll probably be voiding their own tenancy. Their own insurance policy, because that's the other thing is you can sit there and when you declare it, it's in a safe mind, but is it actually in that one? And the thing is, how many landlords are wanting to sit there and provide penthouse apartments or Mercedes-Benz cars with 8mm tread tyre, and how many of them want to sit down there and provide crappy Toyota Corolla cars with 1mm tread that fails the line of fitness, got a burnt-out clutch and a blown heat gasket, and trying to sit there and charge the price of a Ferrari?
Yeah, I mean, these people want to make profits. The slumlords want to make profits. Look, I'm not saying that there's good people that happen to be landlords. I'm not saying that at all. This is rewarding slumlords. This bill.
And
that's all it's doing.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you're rewarding bad behaviour. Like, put it this way, if your house aren't up to code, you still get your tax deductions.
Yep.
You know, like, how do you incentivise someone to do the right things if we keep sitting down there and providing them the opportunities for the wrong things?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've had enough of dealing with rents and rent tenancy. Let's move on to stalking.
Have we lost Gabriel?
I think he's had enough.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, let's go and hear from...
A legislative statement on the Crimes Legislation Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
I move that the Crimes Legislation Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill be now read a first time, and I nominate the Justice Committee to consider the bill. Every New Zealander deserves to feel safe in their community. When a person is stalked, the experience permeates every aspect of their life. The behaviour can escalate to serious physical harm. We know the public is concerned about stalking. We've heard from advocates who tell us stalking needs to be recognised as its own offence. Today I'm very proud to present the Crimes Legislation Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill to the House. This bill delivers on our commitment under the Quarter 4 Action Plan to introduce legislation to address stalking by the end of the year. The bill creates a new offence of stalking and harassment. It repeals the existing offence of criminal harassment in the Harassment Act. We heard from advocates that the placement of the offence within the law is important, as it sends a clear message about its seriousness. The new offence will therefore be inserted into the Crimes Act 1961. The seriousness of the new offence will also be reflected by its penalty. A conviction of the new offence will be punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment. The offence has two key elements that will need to be satisfied to secure a conviction. First, the perpetrator will need to have engaged in a pattern of behaviour against the victim. The bill defines a pattern of behaviour as 3 specified acts within a 12-month period. Secondly, the perpetrator needs to have engaged in that pattern of behaviour knowing it was likely to cause fear or distress to the victim. The bill provides a list of the types of behaviours that may be a specified act. These include things like watching or loitering near the victim, tracking or communicating with the victim, and damaging or interfering with their property. It also includes less tangible harm like damaging or undermining the victim's reputation or relationships. We've heard that stalkers often use other people, organisations and institutions to stalk their victims. Examples of these behaviours and the harm it can cause have also been documented in the media recently. To address this bill provides that specified acts may be done directly or indirectly to the victim. This makes it clear acts may be done through or to a third party with the knowledge that it will cause the victim fear or distress. The bill also makes it clear that a specified act can be done by or through any means or whatsoever. Examples of different means are given, such as the use of tracking devices, spyware and artificial intelligence. These clarifications seek to future-proof the law by ensuring that new forms of stalking can still be captured by the law. To protect legitimate conduct from being criminalised, a defence to the offence is included in the bill. Specifically, it provides that a defendant will not be liable for behaviour done for a lawful purpose, with a reasonable excuse, or in the public interest. This ensures that, for example, law enforcement can perform its function without the risk of persecution or prosecution. As part of the offence, the bill establishes a police notification system. This allows the police to notify stalkers that their behaviour is causing the victim fear or distress, and that if the behaviour continues, they are liable to be charged with the offence. A police notification is not required to prosecute the offence. Receiving a notice will not be a prerequisite for filing a charge, but a notice should not be given instead of prosecution where it is clear an offence has been committed. However, where a notice is given, a notification system will support prosecution. So if a person has previously received a notification and they continue to engage in a pattern of behaviour, the bill creates a presumption that they knew their pattern of behaviour was likely to cause the victim fear or distress. This assists in proving the mental element of the offence. The notification system makes it clear that there are real consequences for stalkers. It also aims to reduce the steps victims need to go through to have their harm responded to. In addition to the new offence, the bill makes supporting amendments to 4 other acts to address stalking. Amendments to the Sentencing Act 2002 aim to better recognise the unique characteristics of stalking and provide better protection for victims. The bill will add 2 new sentencing aggravating factors. First, it will be an aggravating factor if the offending took place where the victim had a restraining order against the offender. Secondly, it will be an aggravating factor if the offender's behaviour towards the victim outside of the offence involved persistent or repetitive behaviour over a prolonged period. That behaviour must have caused or likely to have caused fear or distress in the victim. The bill also allows the court to make new orders when sentencing a person convicted of the new offence. Specifically, the court will be able to make restraining orders under the Harassment Act 1997 and orders under the Harmful Digital Communications Act 2015. This change provides additional protection for victims of stalking, meaning that they won't also have to seek civil remedies alongside a criminal trial. The bill amends the Family Violence Act 2018 to make it clear that stalking can be a form of family violence. Psychological abuse already captures intimidation and harassment, so this change provides consistency and completeness. The evidence indicates that stalkers with access to firearms are more likely to escalate to violence. To address this risk, the bill amends the Arms Act 1983. That amendment provides that a person convicted of a new offence within the last 10 years will be disqualified from holding a firearms licence. Finally, the bill makes changes to the Evidence Act 2006 to prevent a defendant charged with a new offence from personally cross-examining the alleged victim. This amendment aims to reduce the risk of witness intimidation, reflecting the particular nature of stalking cases. I'm proud to bring this bill to the House today, which brings real consequences for stalkers and better responses for victims of stalking. I want to thank the tireless work of the advocates in this space for their continued efforts. I want to acknowledge the more than 18,800 people who signed the Coalition for the Safety of Women and Children's petition to make stalking illegal. We hear you. We're now sending off for a full select committee process where we're happy to discuss the finer details, and I'm sure people will have many things to say about that, and we're very keen to hear those comments. We're delivering on our commitment, Madam Speaker, to ensure that there are 20,000 fewer victims of serious violent crime by 2029, and this bill brings us one step closer to this commitment. I hope that we will enjoy widespread across the House for this important legislation. I commend this bill to the House.
Yeah, good bill. Nothing here to hate. So just some commentary. Stalking is currently treated as a form of harassment in New Zealand, and harassment that causes fear for their own safety or the safety of a family member can result in a 2-year sentence. Obtaining statistics for stalking is really difficult because the police tend to combine stalking data with abduction numbers and other related offences against the person.
So that muddies the water quite a fair bit. Correct.
And having stalking as its own criminal offence will definitely provide clarity. I was able to find some numbers thanks to the Herald, which they managed to obtain under the Official Information Act. They found that reports of criminal harassment have more than doubled in the past 5 years. So from January to September in 2022, there were about 1,250 reports that were filed. So, yeah, it's definitely a problem here in New Zealand, and having it as a separate criminal offence will definitely help with the statistics, at least providing a lot more clarity.
Yeah, I definitely know the feeling of it. Now, the one thing that I think will need to be and may have to be done at Select Committee is the use of the anonymous allegation lines, primarily the WINS one, but also possibly the IRD one, is that WINS are known for covering up breaches of protection orders on that line. To say, but we've got to guarantee them anonymity. Well, they shouldn't be given anonymity if they're breaching a protection order, because you lose the right to anonymity when you're committing a crime to cause that harm. And that's something that needs to be done on there, because, I mean, I know when I fled Kandala, James was things that were threatening in there. And some of the things were ringing the IRD to get me in the ship with the tax department. And some of them were threatening to play around with my disability allowance, equating it to the supported living payment benefit, which, is a complete misunderstanding. Now, IRD probably would sit there and take what he says with grain of salt. Working Income would sit down there and take it with full force as he's telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. He's an abuser, and we'll back the abuser before we back the abuse every single time. Yeah, something that Mr. Alex has brought up was that could the stalking bill cover nuisance streamers as well? As recently in South Korea held a nuisance streamer called Johnny Somali for defacing a statue in South Korea. Who knows?
I was looking at the bill. There is something that allows for restraining orders under the Harassment Act of 1907 and orders under the Harmful Digital Communications Act of 2015 to be made sentencing when sentencing a person convicted of a new offence. So, yeah, it seems that digital or cyber harassment's also been taken into account.
That's a good thing. Okay, let's hear from Ginny Anderson as the first reply.
legislation, Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill. And at the beginning of this year, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister responsible for this bill stated quite clearly on the public record that stalking legislation was in fact not a priority for this government. He explained quite clearly that there was a busy work programme ahead of the justice portfolio, and stalking legislation quite simply was not a high priority on that busy workload. So something changed his mind. Something made him change to make this legislation a priority. Maybe it was the nearly 20,000 signatures delivered to him on the steps of Parliament by all of those women and advocates who worked so hard to bring those signatures together. Maybe it was a members' bill which proposed to do what this bill does, but a bit more, that had the potential for being drawn from the ballot. Or maybe, Madam Speaker, he just had a change of heart. Let's hope it was the third one. So Labor supports this bill because we think it does good work in this space, but we do have some reservations, and I'll go into detail about what those reservations are, and I will ask people who are strong advocates in the sector to submit and put their voices forward to the Select Committee so that all those views can be taken into consideration when we receive submissions on this bill. Before I go into that detail, I'd like to acknowledge three people. There are lots of others I could acknowledge, but I would like to firstly acknowledge Leonie Morris, who is the chair of the Coalition for the Safety of Women and Children. It is Leonie I met and who I worked closely with in the drafting of my members' bill. She is a strong advocate for women's safety and has worked tirelessly in the sector and continues to do so, and has a wealth of knowledge in how to better support victims in New Zealand. I'd like to also acknowledge Aotearoa from the Aotearoa Free from Stalking campaign. They drove a strong campaign that has largely driven and put pressure upon this government to bring this bill to the House before the end of the year, and I acknowledge the hard work that has gone in to do that. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Labour, Zubia and the Anti-Violence Action Community Organisation, who have worked as a group. And so one of the benefits, I would say, of being in opposition is the ability to engage with the front-facing people who do this hard work in our community and understand the nature of issues by engaging with them and understanding the specific circumstances of repeat stalking which happens in New Zealand. Stalking is a shocking and far more prevalent practice than most people understand it to be. It can take many shapes and forms. It can be online, it can be in person, it can be following, it can be repeated unwanted gifts, it can be physical violence, it can be cameras unknown in your home or in your car, it can be tracked through GPS. You can think of many, many, many ways you can try to make someone's life a misery by stalking them. It varies. It can be someone who's had a relationship already, or it can be someone who's never met them but only seen online. But either way, it is a power play to dominate and intimidate someone and to make their life a misery. One of the points I'd like to highlight, Madam Speaker, in the short speech is that this bill has been called tone deaf by the sector. It has been called a watered down protection, and the key reason is that this very bill repeals the harassment law and introduces a new stalking law, and that is what has caused real dismay from the very women who campaigned so strongly and brought together those petitions. The crimes legislation, Stalking and Harassment Amendment Bill, would make it illegal to carry out 3 stalking actions in a year, but very importantly, Madam Speaker, it would also allow the repeal of the related offence of criminal harassment, which is defined as 2 acts of serious harassment in a year. So making it illegal for stalkers to harass their victims twice a year in certain ways is absolutely counterproductive and uncalled for, possibly even unprecedented internationally. And it is called, the sector has called upon the Minister and stated that they are angry at this, quote, bait and switch move. Stalking actions are harmful and the harassment law is wound into this as well. We support the bill, Madam Speaker.
Kakarangi Carter.
Thank you, Madam.
Okay. Interesting that Ginny wants it to go further than what it is, and the fact that it's repealing another law in order to make this become a law.
That is interesting. There's something to definitely keep an eye on in the future. I'll have to look more in depth into that.
And I wonder which committee this will be referred to. Yeah. Oh, let's see what Kahurangi Carter's got to say.
We will be supporting this bill to Select Committee. I want to mahi to the mahi of countless survivors, advocates and whānau members for their tireless work over successive governments to ensure stalking and harassment is taken seriously. Their collaboration, dedication and determination is the reason we are here today. To members across both sides of the House, we are putting our differences aside to focus on our shared vision to prevent all forms of violence, particularly harassment and stalking, which are not inevitable. Our mokopuna deserve our commitment to creating a world where everyone can live free from violence. We are committed to honouring the experiences and the dignity of survivors and will use all the tools available to us so that the bill we pass is fit for purpose, reflects their experiences and will make the world safer. New Zealand's justice system does not sufficiently address stalking. This bill aims to close that gap and better protect victims of stalking. My colleagues have covered the amendments proposed for the bill. Madam Speaker, the Greens recognise that this bill takes a punitive approach.
An essential action to protect victims of stalking and harassment is to focus on prevention and rehabilitation, to address the root causes for the harmful behaviour. We have an across-government strategy, Te Aotearoa, which is a bold action plan to eliminate family and sexual violence in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I mahi to the Honourable Marama Davidson and Jan Logie for shepherding this action plan into fruition. Prevention and rehabilitation includes robust mental health support, ensuring accessible services to address harmful behaviours early, education on healthy relationships and consent in schools, and adequately funding our frontline community one-stop support services. Madam Speaker, we know the work of experts and survivors, like Aotearoa Free from Stalking, and the Coalition for the Safety of Women and Children has been vital to bringing this bill to the House. On the Parliament steps earlier this year, Aotearoa Free from Stalking handed a petition with over 21,000 signatures, which shows how much support this move has. To achieve our goals to protect victims of stalking and harassment, we have to listen to people with lived experience. There are three main concerns that have been brought to our attention by survivors and experts. Firstly, there are concerns about the requirement of the 12-month timeframe and 3 specific actions to meet the threshold for stalking. Leonie Morris from the Coalition for the Safety of Women and Children said, quote, "Making it legal for stalkers to harass their victims twice in a year in a certain way is counterproductive and uncalled for and possibly unprecedented internationally." Secondly, many victims who have struggled to have their stalking taken seriously have raised concerns about police training. We need police to be properly equipped to recognise and respond to stalking. Thirdly, the third main concern is the lack of mandatory consideration of stalker rehabilitation, like non-violence programs. Madam Speaker, these concerns, among others, show why it is so important that we have a select committee process. We need to hear directly from survivors and sector experts. Let's uplift their voices and make sure this bill addresses their needs and honours the mana of their experiences. Stalking is terrifying and horrific, and it can happen to anyone. We can create a future where everyone in Aotearoa can live free from violence with dignity and peace. To the survivors and allies, we've got you.
Honourable Karen.
Okay, that was very quick.
Good speech. I like what she's proposing.
Yeah, I think Select Committee is going to be very interesting. Now let's hear from Karen.
And here today, not only on behalf of ACT, but as Minister for Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence.
I thought you said Karen.
I feel humbled
Karen.
to be able to speak to this today. You'll have to excuse me, this is kind of personal for me.
Oh, fuck.
Stalking doesn't just affect the main victim. It affects their family, it affects their children, living in fear on a daily basis, not knowing what's going to meet them at the gate in the morning. When you see the light disappear from somebody's eyes, their whole life just destroyed by a person who thinks that it's okay to do that to them. When you sit in a hospital and you watch a woman who cannot even say their name because they've lost the ability to speak. I know we're doing the right thing by bringing this bill to the House. I'm sorry for the tears, but they're not tears of weakness. They're tears of years of women screaming for help, of children not knowing how to help their parent, taking on that responsibility of trying to step in between the perpetrator and the victim and becoming a victim themselves. All because police do not have the tools to be able to stop this from happening. I look forward to the day when we don't hear on the other end of the phone they're not breaking any rules, when a person can stand at the top of a driveway and stare daggers down at a person that is absolutely petrified, but there's nothing the police can do because they haven't stepped onto your property, but they can stand at the top of your driveway and put the living fear of God into you. I look forward to the day where we can actually say we're not going to tolerate this anymore. I look forward to the day where children are not seeing the fear in their parents' eyes. And I look forward to the day where we are backing the victims. And that is what we are doing today. Today we are going to say it is not okay to torment, to put fear and distress upon somebody to the point where they can no longer live a life without fear and without violence. I would like to thank Honourable Paul Goldsmith for bringing this bill today. I know it has been quite a full-on year with a lot of legislation that has to be passed, and I am grateful that this has been given priority. This will make an absolute difference to so many people in this country and go a long way towards breaking that cycle of harm. which is what Te Aorere Kura is all about. And I will shout out to Marama Davison for starting the conversation that needed to be started. And I'm honoured to carry that conversation on now because it is too important for this to not continue. We need to focus on women and children who have for far too long been put in the background in a too hard basket. The effects that stalking have are massive. I cannot state enough how big this is. It will create an absolute opportunity for women, children and some men to get freedom. Freedom from being under the thumb of a possessive person who thinks that it is okay to be in that person's space without permission, and it is okay to create that form of fear. It is not okay, and we as a House are standing here united today to say we are all on the same page, and it will not be tolerated anymore, and we will not allow this to happen anymore, and we will give the police the tools that they need to stop this from happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what her background is. I don't know if she's a victim of stalking, but if she has been a victim of stalking, that is horrible. And
the methods that she mentioned are a very common tactic. I can confirm with the fact with Kandala, James was one of the things was messaging me how he was going to turn up to Johnsonville Market to have a conversation.
Yep. I'm not going to shit on someone because they've been a victim of stalking. I've got other things I can criticise her for, but I'm not going to criticise her if she's gone through a traumatic experience. Yeah, that's a little blow from me.
Also have gone up as a result of being the Minister for Children as well, and considering some of the policies done there, because I do know that during the height of the COVID vaccine pass area, there were people who used the same stalking standover tactics going, well, I can stand outside Ginny Anderson's electorate office and sit down there and create problems, because I don't agree with what Labor's doing. So I have a right to throw out my personal responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, look what happened to Jacinda.
Yeah, like people who sit there go, but I can threaten her because I'm aggrieved. It's like, but you can't. There's a standard of where you can sit there and behave, and threatening someone with their life because you're upset over something.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, stalking is a horrible thing to do to someone. Don't be an asshole. Don't stalk other people.
Yeah.
There's my PSA for the day.
Yep. Okay, Casey Costello.
Bill. I would firstly like to start my contribution by acknowledging the member, the Honourable Karen Shaw, for not only her strength and conviction, her honesty and her ability to bring the humanity on important issues, and I am grateful that she shared her experiences and her passion on this topic. Madam Speaker, this is an important piece of legislation because we talk a lot about the need to rectify violence and to reduce the level of violent crime. But in doing this, we have to empower our victims. We have to allow our victims to know that there is something that can be done. We have to allow our victims to understand that what is being done is wrong, that they can be in a place of strength, they can be supported, they can be encouraged, and they can be protected. I have been in the position where I have dealt with victims who the offenders have approached just to the line and not over. And the helplessness as a police officer to stand there and go, there isn't anything we can do. We can move you, we can hide you, but we can't actually empower you. Yep. And exactly what this bill does is it creates that level of empowerment. But more so, commending Minister Goldsmith, it is a piece of legislation that clearly creates the tools and the equipment and the opportunities to deal with this proactively, that we can intervene early, we can intervene strongly, we can let the offenders know that this is the line they have crossed and actually make sure when they cross it again, something really tangible happens. New Zealand First strongly supports the principle of protecting New Zealanders from harm. We have committed to the advocacy of law and order. We are advocating strongly for legislation that listens to the public concerns. But most importantly, we want to see less victims. We want to see the opportunity that people are held accountable, and they cannot create more victims in their journey through their drunkenness of empowerment over the fact that they can hurt people and create that level of control over them. So it is with great pleasure that New Zealand First commends this bill to the House. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with her here. I know police officers that have been incredibly frustrated that they can't do something. They just have to kind of stand there and let it happen.
They can watch the potential of the foundations for it to unfold, but they can't intervene until actually it's gone past that, like, very seriously no point of return point.
Yeah, so Casey, for the first time, is actually right. I agree with
that. So there's a couple of things she's right on, but yes.
I mean, the first time today she's right. So, yeah, I do agree with her today.
I mean, first appearance today. Yeah. Okay, let's, was it, now, is it Mariah or Maria? Was it Maria Meno Kapakingi? Is it Mariah Meno or Maria Meno?
All of the above.
Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the speakers prior to me and
Maria Meno.
Truth when it lands, particularly when there's that real palpable emotion and story. It's important among all the other emotions that rage in the House, particularly tonight, Madam Speaker. This particular take, I think, is a serious and good one. And then in saying that, our party supports the intention and looks forward to what we end up coming up with in the select committee process. But I just want to open up with that statement. Thank you. Just want to mihi, obviously, recognise the inspiration behind the bill, and the whānau, the young women, will be recognising the 2nd anniversary of their daughter's passing. I won't say the name, but I want to acknowledge that, and that is so significant to what it is that we're considering. I won't speak to that for too long, but just to recognise that in my kōrero. Yet to the whānau, I acknowledge the loss, and to recognise this is something that will likely remain unhealed. Part of my discussion too tonight, Madam Speaker, is I worked for many years teaching self-defence to women across the motu. That was one of my, well, it's not a passion, because that makes it it was a duty to do so, and many are a story of trauma and violence, but also, can I say, victory too, and I'm telling these stories, this isn't my story, but just to acknowledge that that's what
we love our Moto Queens.
This evening. What does alarm me is the rates and the frequency in which young women fall victim to the predatory behaviour and stalking practices over their lifetime. Many of us who are the young women in this House and our young daughters, we think about them when we are talking about this particular issue, and we should think about them. We should think about what it takes to protect them, and this bill lends itself to that idea. But I'm always a fan of teach your girls to defend themselves. Teach your girls, show them, demonstrate to them, and every moment when you are that you are entitled to, and that you have a right to defend and protect yourself. In these instances, though, it is a near impossible situation. While this bill will make it illegal to carry out the 3 stalking actions in a year, it would also repeal the related offence. And one of the speakers, I think from Labour, made that exact same comment, and that is still a concern. And I think we need to think about that more carefully. When we think that in a sense, it makes it illegal to stalkers to harass their victims twice a year. It won't be just twice a year. It'll be countless times, because they're not going to ring up and go, okay, it's happening. And many of these reports and concerns, they go unreported. They go untold. And much of that is simply because you get tired of telling the same story and nobody believes you, or not enough people, and nobody moves to do something about it for you. So just another point for us in this discussion. Damn, it goes so quickly. And the New Zealand Women's Refuge has recorded the prevalence of stalking amongst their clients. Many of our whānau, nearly 75%, were stalked by their partners. And a study conducted in 2004, just only 20 years ago, found that stalking was a precursor to physical violence. With a little time left, I just want to say we support the bill. We look forward to going to Select Committee, and I look forward to having much more to say about it. Kia ora tātou.
Yeah, I didn't know she was like a Maurako queen. Maurako, for those that aren't aware, that's the art of using patu and taiaha, so in a combat situation. So it's like, okay, yeah, I love our Maurako queens. Awesome.
Oh, I love the comment put in by Kiwi Skirt. Okay, well, that's it for this urgency special. We'll be back at 8 p.m. But before we go, the bills that you need to submit on. The Family Giving Evidence of Family Violence Amendment Bill closes Thursday, 19th of December. The Police Vetting Amendment Bill closes 19th of December. The Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protection Legislation Bill, Thursday 19th. The Mental Health Bill, Friday the 20th of December. The Treaty Principles Bill, Tuesday the 7th of January. The Raoranga Tamariki Responding to Serious Youth Offending Amendment Bill, Thursday 9th of January. So those are the bills that have submissions coming up. So please make sure that you get your submissions out on there. We obviously are going to have to sit there and take a quick break because I actually have an urgent phone call to make. I think, Laura, you and I both have to get dinner sorted.
I have to do a shit ton of reading for the next show.
Oh, yes. Thank you for doing that.
Gabriel, you can just go off the cuff. That's impressive. I have to read.
Yes, it is something that comes with time.
Yep.
It is something that comes with time. So thanks to all our people watching. We'll see you all back here at 8 p.m. for the main Order Paper podcast show.
Thank you for watching The Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at 8 p.m. New Zealand Standard